This is one of those VNs with a long ass name, Virche Evermore, Error Salvation. Basically each route can be pointed to either parts of the title, but really could have been called Error Salvation, would have worked well. Before I go into it, by the time this is out, I probably already finished all my tier lists for the halfway of the year. It'll be on the blog because if I did a video on it, it'll be like 3 hours long and I'm not doing that. Anyways, this VN was rated pretty highly and I remember someone recommended it to me, but the way it started was really my thing. And a good chunk of that might be because I started with Malthis. We'll go through the characters later. I feel like it was being too edgy and it hurt the experience. Not to say that the common route doesn't have its own share of it, considering you start the title with the main character killing herself after showing like a bunch of people were dying and around her throughout her life. Was kind of annoying. This part wasn't really a spoiler, it happens like the first 5 minutes, though I'm not really dancing around the spoilers all that much this time around. It's not to say this is the first Otome that has like some edge to it. I feel like that's part of the charm in some of these. It just went a little too much this time around. Not that it was grotesque, honestly, it's not even at the border of it. I just felt myself getting bored a couple of times because you know what's going to happen. It's almost like Twilight, but not really. I wouldn't be that bad on it. The visuals are normally great, but the style kind of weirds me out at times. I think it's the mouths mostly, but sometimes it's also the eyes. I think it works if it was trying to creep you out at times, but I don't think that was like the common case of it. The soundtrack doesn't fare that well in comparison. It works well with what it's trying to convey throughout the scenes, but some tracks are used a lot more where it just becomes boring. There are some great tracks in there, but you'll remember like 2 outside of the vocal tracks, and the despair ending track kind of makes me feel like playing Baroque a lot. And hey, that's fun, you know, it's an extra. Anyways, the plot centers around an island that's supposedly cursed. Basically, everybody that's born on the island has like a life expectancy cap of 23, but it wasn't unusual to die before that anyway. The people were going to be wiped out, but someone figured out how to clone their bodies while transferring their memories into it. They're no longer considered humans, and they're all like called relivers. They get this tattoo, which is kind of like their genetics or something. It's been like a month since I read this. I wrote a lot of notes down, but apparently I didn't write about this. I just consider it more like a birthmark. The process costs a shit ton of money, so you're basically perpetually working because you have to swap out your body every 23 years, except there's a lot of paperwork and it takes a while to prepare for the common people, leading to like a queue. So you should have it all set around like 19 or 20, I forgot. It's like in the common story. So technically they kind of fucked that up considering one commoner got back up and running like the same day. So like, I thought you had a queue, what the fuck happened? Anyways, it seems like the island is set and they have their own rhythm going on, except now comes the main girl that's being referred to as like Death or the Grim Reaper. People just randomly die around her either from accidents or they get sick out of nowhere. She's kind of a downer for a while, but it makes sense with her circumstances. So she was doing some errands and finds a massive pile of corpses. Other people reach the scene and freak out. It's like, oh shit, it's her, she killed everybody. She thinks like, oh, maybe it is true because this is always fucking happening around me, but some of her friends tell us like, nah, it's not. You just showed up, what the fuck you're talking about? And like, oh, how they died was too extreme, like cause of death for what she can even do. So like, no, it's not you, dumbass. So, and there's more to it, but it doesn't really matter for what I'm talking about. So it's now night and she runs off to kill herself, but gets stopped by the mysterious being called like Anko. This is like the second time. It's like a repeat or whatever, right? So he tells her like, oh, there's other shit going on this island. She's not the cause of this specific case, and he wants her to team up with them to get all these things sorted, and then he can help her remove her own curse. And then there's this whole common route that's fine, that's just about trying to capture the person that actually caused the massive pile of like bodies, and then once it's over you can pick up whatever route you want of the first 3. These are just the stepping stones for the 4th route, and then adding that with the first 3 routes make it so the finale makes sense because you'd just be lost otherwise. Each route basically finishes at something called like a despair end, and while that sounds like a bad end, it's technically both. There are actual bad ends where you or someone else dies or the town goes crazy, etc. But the despair ending is just you reaching the conclusion of that specific path because otherwise you're like stuck in the dark. So once you finish the final route, you can go back to the first 4 routes and you get like their own like true ending or their happy ending. Parts of it's pretty dumb, but I'll get to that in the spoilers. Anyways, the first 3 routes are on Malthis, Lucas, and Scien. I forgot how to pronounce his name. Scien should also be the 3rd one, and the other 2 doesn't really have an order. It makes sense to do Malthis first, but you can explain your way around it to do like Lucas first and have Malthis second. Even in the own VN, it's like, oh, Lucas is the first one. So once you finish those 3, the Yves route gets unlocked and then the true one, and that's over, right? The general pacing of the routes are like, first half of it is setting up what she's going to do around the guy, and then something gets revealed and all the dead bodies blows out of the guy's closet, and now you see how things get handled after that. Except Yves. He's like a good boy. Well, he's kind of fucked up, but in a different way. He just means well, I guess. So Malthus is like a kid that wants to be seen as more of a man. He's more of a literature nerd, and his clan, I guess his family, right? It's like one of the major families in here. They basically like handle all the translating of any books they found throughout the island, or any texts or whatever, any scrolls, whatever you want to call it, right? Straight up, I dislike Malthus. There's not much to him, and it's almost to the point that you can just almost write him out of the plot. Or rather, keeping him for world building. Technically, things around him are needed to make part of the plot works in the finale, but doesn't really have to. You don't have to do a lot to make it work. His route is probably the most edgy out of the initial bunch, and honestly it's quite boring. But hey, I knew a couple people loving Twilight when it came out, and like hey, maybe it's for that kind of crowd, who knows. Honestly, he's just kind of a loser. His VA wasn't Pio Fiore, and in that one he was an important character to the plot even though he was barely around, and that should have been the case in this one as well. It was one of those things like, hey, he's important, he's there, just not a route. Anyways, until shit goes down, she's mainly hired to cook for him or like clean for his shit, and he gets interested in her, and you know, vice versa, and they find common interests, and those common interests gets used for like the finale, but also not really kind of thing. It's a heavy spoiler type of thing. It's like his route is more important than him. So then there's Lucas. He's like represented as like, oh, he's the kind teacher, he's super into religion, and he's randomly strong. He's pretty sickly, but that makes sense considering he's nearing 23, so he's about to die. He's also not a huge fan of the Reliver stuff because, you know, the religion aspect of it, it's like, why you, it's like, no, we were expected to die. So he's kind of like the highlight of the VN, not because of his plot or his interactions with the rest, but because of his VA. Dude went all out, like his manager was about to fire his ass if he didn't do it that well. This only happens maybe like halfway through the route, but it doesn't stop until it's done. His route is honestly just as edgy as the one with Malthus, and probably even more toxic, but at least it was fun the whole way through. In his route, you're basically a teacher state until it starts revolving around his family. His stuff is pretty important to the overall plot. It gets brought up a lot, though to be fair, he's kind of boring until then, but it doesn't take all that long to get to that point. The route is meant to show the divide between the Relivers and the sect that values life for what it originally was, and rather just die at 23. Then there's Scien, he's like the head scientist. He made all the Reliver stuff work, and no one knows the ins and outs of it as well as him. To the point that royalty hates his ass because they basically have to listen to him or they're fucked and they just die. He's okay. I liked him a decent bit, but there's also nothing here that like, hey, I'll go talk to someone else about him. It's like, that's fine. I think he's interesting. He's mainly an asshole that just gets the group to work for him since he finds the soldiers to be completely useless. And honestly, they kind of are when you consider how much they built, abused, and ate off. The point that they're mentioned to be able to take on like a whole group of each on their own. Anyway, she's hired as a maid this time around to clean up his dirty ass room. Technically, what he likes about her is that she handles what's missing without obstructing his like work life, because that's like his whole thing. His route is more about the Relivers and the process behind it, but also about the nobles, but more so on how he's trying to make the bodies more resilient towards the curse, and what else he can do to enhance the bodies in transferring this emotional aspect from memories. Overall, the route is fine, and it's probably the level of edge that's no longer comical, but it's also more of a stepping stone for the true route again. He uses the fourth route, and he's basically just a busybody that wants to be nice to everybody. It's pretty much a byproduct of him getting his face burned back like when he was a kid, and a lot of people are just like, ew, what the fuck, go away. He's a handyman that takes all the like basic jobs. He works for the Vigilante Corps with like a couple of other characters while also having some hobbies throughout the route. Adolf is another one that's like, two of them are like vice leaders or something, right? The routes uses the stuff learned from the other 3 routes and includes those 3 to help out flush out like a few parts, but also centers more on the people of the land. It also goes through what he's about and mostly about his family, but also covers his business with Hugo, which is like a sidekick, which is probably one of the more interesting parts of the route. This one is a lot more normal in comparison to the other 3 since he's an overall good kid, but it's more so that he's a different kind of messed up that originates from his burnt face. Basically, he can function in a normal society, but he's still kind of fucked up. It's more so that the town is fucked up on what's happening. It's more of a circumstances thing, whereas like, hey, everybody's just going freaky, and Yves like, no, I want to do this, and this is the right thing to do, and everybody's like, hell no, I want to do this shit, even though it's kind of evil, and like, not, it's morally evil, and they're like, but it'll help us out. Overall, it's a title that I can understand all these people giving it a 9, but only in terms of like taste or theme. The atmosphere and the history behind the town and its people are done well, but the actual tone is not for me at times. Part of it is that Sears, which I don't even know if I'm pronouncing her name right, isn't all that compelling. The idea around her can be cool, but she's kind of boring more often than not. I get tired of her down her ass, even though it's understandable why she's like that, but it's like, dude, I'm bored. Like, I feel almost every character that has a spray is more charming than her, but you can also see it as like, oh, it's like a Moe title type of thing where the main character is more of a avatar type shit, but this one's done well. Sometimes she is fun, sometimes she is really crazy. So, you know, there's scenes where it's like, holy shit, this is great, but the thing is, that is like 5% of the time. There's also a couple parts that could have been written better, and a lot of that is mainly them trying to appease the fans and giving them every guy like a happier moment. But it's like the OG Nasu issue thing where he tries to give like a happier ending to like Seal or Rin, and it's like it doesn't need to be there. Some people might have liked it, but it's like, dude, the normal ending was fine. It was sometimes even, actually not even sometimes, I think both times were both better than this happy ending. But whatever, that's more of an issue with me than that, right? I'll go through the issues in the spoilers because most of them can be talked around from. I'm giving it an 8, and I feel like that's kind of generous at times, but other times I think it's appropriate. But sure, parts of the routes are kind of whatever, but it's there to get the true route to make sense. Or rather how to see that the steps leading to the finale is logical. It's one of those titles where the finale kind of carries it, but the initial routes are still fine on its own with their own like impact and their own reveals. Everything's well done. I think a lot of it was that some routes could have been shortened down like Malthis, and he could have just been punted out because he just causes more issues than not. I feel like this will be one of those titles where I look back and I wonder why I just gave it an 8 because it feels like a high 9. All because I forgot all about like the little irritations piling up along the way. Also, I think I talked about this before, unless it was something I never pushed out, but I'm splitting the score into groups, and it's like the overall fun I had with it, and then there's like how's it written overall, and like how much impact did it have. So overall, I would have like as an 8, and I'd probably push to a 9 in a couple years down the line. Like I said before, the impact was like a 6 or 7. It's not done well, but there's instances where it spikes really high to like a 10 and some 9s, but it's very rare. And I think that's like a normal case in most fans, but in some of them are like the impact is always coming and it's always going through. And this one's like there's like a lot of lull, and it's like holy shit, this is boring. And a decent part of the issue is like, oh, you have to start from the beginning again. I feel like that's like an Atomi issue a lot. And other times like oh, we need a route from each one. You need to start up, and it's like a ladder structure probably wouldn't solve a lot of this. No, it would be like a ladder structure that has to be forced. So I guess an enforced order is what I'd talk about more than that. And in terms of enjoyment, it's more of like a 6 or 7 some routes, and like maybe a high 8 or a low 9 in the final route. So like the common route was like a 5, and Malthis is like a 4. And then Lucas is like an 8, and Scien is maybe a 7, and then Yves like an 8, and then it's like a 9 for the final. So this is now the spoiler sections. This will handle a bit of each route, but mainly on the latter half of them. The issue with these routes is they're forced to have a bad ending. Not to say there's not other bad endings, but the finale is called the spare ending, where everything is just fucked instead. Well, sometimes they're fucked, but not as bad. They only provide the good ending after the finale, so you get the 2 good endings from the finale, then you get the other 4 if you play the other routes. Still, technically, you can save in a part and it'll be fine. Except most of them are kind of ass because there's no real reason why it works better this time around. This was kind of the structure with Even If Tempest, but that plot was interwoven with the premise. It makes sense in that one. If they add some extra content and finagle with something that's talked about in the true route, it could have worked, but it's not doing it. It's more of a, and this time everything worked out perfectly fine for no apparent reason, and it's like, what the fuck? So let's say for Malthis, Ceres gets hired as a maid, and it's the basic level of getting to know each other until they're into each other. But then shit happens when Burrow randomly shows up. Burrow is the main target in the common plot. It's believed he was the one that killed all the people. He basically got like an acid attack and should have been dead, but now he's here again. Malthis has a massive hate boner against this guy because he killed his brother and he was really close to him. On a side note, Burrow means executioner in French. They like using French in this time around, I don't know. But it's hilarious for me considering that apparently the pronunciation of it is basically donkey, dumbass, or slash retard, depending on the tone in my language. It's hilarious. So you call him the main obstacle for a good while, just a retard. And that reminds me of like the old Korean manhwa called like Special Martial Arts Extreme Hell Private School. It was really dumb. And I think there's like 3 powerhouses and one was called, oh, he's the retard. It's like, what the fuck? This is messed up. But it was hilarious. Anyways, Malthis is going crazy again. You're already seen this in the common route for a tiny bit here and there, and he becomes abusive until he swaps back. A lot goes on, but it's basically his butler implanting memories into Malthis. Malthis technically doesn't exist in terms of society. He's a homunculus made by the butler. He's called Gene. Except Gene also doesn't exist. He's actually the heir of the Cloud family, which is like the Malthis thing. Honestly, I already forgot his real name already, so I'll keep him as Gene. So basically, he's constantly putting memories into Malthis to keep him running, but that keeps fucking him up more. And this whole thing is to figure out a way to replicate emotions perfectly into like a new reliver because his wife died, but before he got his own happy ending, and it's a pretty common plot point in other VNs. And that's what it is. It's like, that's fine. So the plot goes on with Ceres helping out Gene to keep Malthis alive, and it's like a bet between them to see if Malthis, she knows, keeps surfacing throughout like these progressively monstrous people he's implanting in his memories. And by the end of this despair ending, Jean sees Sirius as like the perfect copy of his wife or something, and just slaps his own replica of emotions into Malthis, like, hey, I'm your husband now. It's like, what the fuck? So it's an eternal fight between him and Malthis, like, or Sirius and Jean, where it's like, maybe Malthus will resurface again and override Jean, maybe not, and that's like the whole despair ending for it. And once you finish the final route, you can come back to this route. The abuses actually gets worse, but the whole Jean to Malthus thing doesn't happen this time around. Malthus kind of gets soon about it and it's like says fuck it because what they're doing or like what they're going through, and they're always like, succeeding, even though it's a little mental in here. It's stupid. He still doesn't like Malthus, and the lab caves in while Malthus tries to save him. But Jean's all like, fuck you, man. I'll be with my wife in this tube thing, and Malthus better enjoy the rest of his remaining time with Sirius. Like, it's a weird thing because this whole thing of Jean actually kind of sees him as his little brother, but also still hates him because he got what he couldn't get. It's like, all right. And it's supposed to be this whole like dramatic thing where they know their time is limited, or Malthus and Sirius' time is limited, and so they just spend time with each other. And then it does happen, but then Jean just figures it out, but it was kind of too late. But he could like, oh, he could come back depending on Malthus if he's strong enough. And of course it happens, and I'll talk about that in the Sheen part later on. But for now, I'm saying all this is bullshit. It should have been finished with the remaining time. It would have been fine. It would have been like a dream line type of thing. So anything important about this route is actually about the Claw family and the experiments done by Jean. The experiments is a pretty small part. It's used more for like clues to find like the actual antagonist. So for Sheen, which is like Sheehan or whatever, but I'm just calling Sheen. So he should have been saved for third, but he technically connects to Malthus better. So in terms of like structure, he would be third, but I'm talking second because it would make more sense. Anyways, the whole point of Sheehan is about himself and the Reliver tech. The whole city would be dead without him. He doesn't really care about anything outside of keeping these bodies alive. It's like basically a puzzle to him and he wants to solve it. Things like entertainment or feelings are just wasting his time, so because he's always on a timer, right? He only has 23 years. He believes that if he at least had like 2 extra years before needing to swap bodies, he would already solved it. And that's like this whole thing is like, yeah, okay, we have more time, but our brain doesn't progress or some shit, so like my potential is capped out, and he's kind of mad about that. So the route is centered around Sheen trying to figure it out, and Sirius cleaning his filthy ass room because he doesn't want to waste time on that either. So she works around his mindset, and he appreciates that even though he rarely says it. Basically fired everybody else before him because they kept trying to like interfering with what he's doing in some way or another. So it's basically a competition between Sheen and the Hoot, who's basically like the person that's right underneath Sheen. Sheen doesn't care about any of that and just wants to update the Reliver's respiratory system, and the Hoot wants to make this emotion transfer work. The Hoot's research isn't at the same level in terms of progress, so Sheen doesn't care about it. It's like, well, hey, if you don't have any progress, I don't care about it. Come back when you have something done. So a lot of the stuff is happening throughout the plot, and that's not really necessary to what I want to talk about. There's a lot of political drama with the nobles in this route, and it's actually important for the true route, but you can say that the gist of it all is that the nobles are assholes like usual in most plots. They hate Sheehan, and they'd rather kill him off since the people respect him more than the royalty, but they can't kill him off because he's most likely the answer to keep them from never dying. You also find out Sheehan is doing a decent amount of human experimentation around to figure out like how to make things work, how to make the body stronger, and he's trying to make stronger lungs, but that ended up fucking up like the royalty even more. It's like, holy shit, this is bad. And it's like Sheehan told him, it's like, no, it's not a good product. I tried it, it wasn't working well. And they're like, no, this is updated, that means it's better. It's like, oh, well, you suck. You know, a lot of shit happens, and there's like a coup d'etat in the lab, and so you have your gang trying to force them back into the lab to try to find like, you know, Sheen had this new idea and he wants to do it, but they're like, he put him as a traitor now, and it's like, it's this whole thing, it doesn't really matter. And his whole new project, like, okay, I have this new storage unit, and all the feelings, emotions are going to go there, and it'll interact with the rest of the system, and it'll work out fine. So in the despair ending, Sirius dies because Sheen finishes migrating his new body too late, so he starts loading up her emotions into his body, and the dude is just depressed all the time, but he can talk to her. And then Salvation ending is like, hey, this time it worked out faster, and she's not dead yet, and I saved her, and now shit works. Like, and now he has all these emotions to use with her and shit. Like, this is boring. Why did it work this time around? Who knows? It could have worked if a couple of factors were added, but I'll talk about that later. But without them, it's a large amount of like, don't think about it for me. Just dumb. Later on, in what I believe is the Yves route, it gets revealed that there's a bug in the reliver system where eventually it goes kaput if there's too much emotional spike in terms of like love for some reason. It's basically a trigger and you can replicate it pretty easily, and that's one of the main reasons why Shein never cared about making the emotion transfer work, because like, hey, you put the emotions there, it'll be even easier to produce and you're just fucked. So basically you're overloading the system, and I guess the second heart or storage unit or whatever I mentioned before, it probably works with that, and I think that's like the whole thing going for it, so it works fine. So now that Shein is done, I can talk about Lucas. Dude put all his energy into voicing this guy. He was putting like Hamlet level of campy. It doesn't really shine until like the last third, but it's just a fun ride after that. His route centers around genetics and humanity, but the genetics come into way later. Basically, he wants to stay human because the whole case of relivers not retaining their emotions. He treasures his sister, and it's basically like reciprocated, and they're afraid of like the bond vanishing, so none of them want to, like, no, none of us want to do that. He wasn't really fully one way or another until the parents did it, and then the parents, I think, didn't care about the sister all that much. Like, oh man, she's always sick and shit. And they're like, okay, fuck this system, I'm not doing it, we're just gonna die at 23. His sister either has been frail or has been after, like, I think she had a fever like a month old. It's been a bit, and it's probably like I'm mixing generic plot points together. Anyways, Lucas is basically in a cult, and their leader's like, hey, if you kill all these relivers and take their hearts and crap, God will be happy and help your sick sister. And it works, and he just keeps on doing it, not knowing it's the cult leader just keeping her alive. It's like, hey, he has other medicine that's doing it. It's not you doing sacrifices, but he doesn't know about that. It's like, hey, it works, I'm gonna do it. So it gets revealed that he's like Burrow, but honestly it was kind of obvious, and the route is mainly Sirius getting cornered because they're into each other, and then she tries to change his mind. A quarter of the route is like bad endings, like, hey, did you try to out him? Did you try to say that he's Burrow? He's gonna kill you. And you know, that was kind of funny, I guess. And you know, it's like, oh, he wants her to be on the humanity side, but also is fine with her just being around him until he dies, which is rather soon. I think it has like maybe 4 months. A lot of people are actually surprised he's still kicking. And there's a lot that I'm skipping, but basically the cult leader used to work for Shein before he got fired, and that was because genetic disorders is more of like his kink. He loves that shit. He wants to bank special DNA for some stupid reason, and then that includes Sirius, because her DNA is also kind of like fucked up. And it turns out his sister has like muscle dystrophy, and maybe they could have done something, but the cult leader's being all kinky about it, so I was like, no. I don't think he had a solution anyway, but the hoot would have helped him. The irony is she got a bad hen. Generally, the Proust family has like muscular hypertrophy, except none of them knew about it, so that's why they're all freakishly strong. They're all monsters. And that's because the island kind of dumped anything outside the reliver tech. It's kind of made sense. Your ass hits 23 max, you're most likely not having like a problem or any kind of genetic shit anyway. And if you do, and you have the cash, you can just become a young reliver anyway. Except if you have like some really fucked up shit and you clone, it's like, hey, if you had it from the beginning, you're still gonna have it because of the genetics. It's like, I think that was the case on her story. It's like, yeah, even if you're reliver, she's gonna be stuck like this anyway. And the other problem is like, oh, for some reason your skill set gets stuck there, and I'm not sure why. So if you're like 12 and you have the reliver shit, it's like your max cap is at 12 for some stupid reason. And I'm pretty sure like most of them just don't want to try something else when they already like got a skill set. But there's also like this whole Shein thing, getting stuck and trying to get his body to 25. It's like, hey, if I can get 2 more years, I'll be a little bit smarter. I'll have more, like, my cap will be increased. It doesn't make any sense on why this works this way, but it's just how it is. Lucas and Sheen's routes hold a larger clues on what's happening. One raises the question if they already don't know all that much about genetics, and it's like, hey, maybe all this virus shit and this curse is a genetic issue. And the other being like, oh, you're bashing your head with the same idea and mindset all the damn time. Sometimes throwing your initial concept and doing something else will work out better. Technically, this was also Sheen's part in the user route as well. It's like, dude, you have so much tunnel vision once you have like a possible solution. Just like the others, this has like a deviation between the despair and the salvation endings. So the whole base is that the cult leader's drugging him up and making him more of a beast and not question shit, and he's sent to kill off everybody in Sheen's lab, including Sheen himself. So you go there, try to stop him with your own plant, but she just gets stabbed. His mind clears up since he no longer finds any enemies and goes mental because now Sirius is dead. So the ending is about Lucas in some hideout with like the bony ass Sirius by his side, and he's just talking to her even though she's dead. It's like, okay, it's edgy. Technically, there's a different ending, which I think is also called a despair ending, where she lives and gets hanged, and honestly, it's a better ending overall. She wasn't even into it this time around because she's like, oh, I'm gonna see Lucas again. We're both gonna be dead. Well, he's already dead. Hey, now she's gonna be dead, right? But then he comes in and is like spiritually and says like, hey, we're not gonna meet up unless we're like reborn, because dude, you didn't do anything wrong. I killed like 1,000 people. I'm gonna be in hell. You're not. And she falls into further despair. It's like, holy shit, now I don't even get to see him anyways. Like, this is fucked up. And it was like overly well done. It was like kind of edgy, but it's not like Malthis level edgy. It works fine. And I forgot if this was even required for the salvation ending, but I think it was. Anyways, his salvation ending is great. There's no real fix for what he did. He killed a massive amount of relivers. Sure, he's just drugged and kind of mentally off, but he still knew what he was doing. And he figures out that none of what he was doing was actually helping his sister as well, so that's even more mental damage right there. Anyways, instead of killing Sirius, he gets stabbed instead. So, and with that, he wakes up from like his mental delusion shit and asks Sirius to help him out. I was like, hey, I need you to carry me to the lab because what's the cult leader's lab, because he has to save his sister and he has to kill off, I think the cult leader's name was like Cappuccine or something, and you know, he has to stop all this bullshit that he's doing over there. And the scenes are great, but they don't really matter for what I'm talking about. Basically, he dies, she wants to die, and Uncle helps her out, and it pans out a bit in like in a couple of scenes, and they show the burial place showing Uncle's waiting for them to be reborn, and then you see Lucas's image walking out. And it's like, okay, showing that the process is starting. It's like they are going to be reborn, and it reflects back to the second despair ending. It works well. So you get a Malthis surviving when logically I don't think it could have been happened without how they told it. This guy was a total mess at the end, and I think he needed like additional material like memory shit every day at that point. Sure, could Sheehan handle it if it was like Sheehan from like a couple of different routes? Yeah, that's not the Sheehan. If he had more time, would it also work? Maybe, but they didn't have enough time. And then you have Sheehan, where the difference is mainly that she survived long enough for him to get out. It's super lazy. Like, I feel like I missed something because damn, this is lazy. And then you have Lucas, where they're like, nah, this guy is too far gone, and it did it well. And the one for Yves was also kind of dumb, where it just started raining and that solved it. But on the other hand, it's like you can also see it like, oh, they didn't go mental this time around, and whatever they were doing, they didn't do it this time around, and maybe it was raining there too, you know, that's how they solved it. I don't know. And I guess you notice that I rarely talked about Yves or the other couple of main characters, and that's because overall the routes are well done. It explains what's happening over there, explains how the solutions will work. It works well with joining all the components from the previous 3 routes. There's nothing to shit talk about, so it's not fun to talk about it anymore. And it's something better experienced by yourselves. The most I'll bring up is like initially the people's life expectancy wasn't 23 years, it was 21, and that's dependent on what Uncle was doing in the past, and he could technically redo everything and what he was doing there, and maybe they could get to 25 years, who knows. But considering the new normal life expectancy, maybe Sheehan wouldn't go as hard and they'll just be in the same predicament anyway as before, because it does feel like Sheehan only works best like under time constraints. But in the end, I see this title a lot like Ever 17, where the last title makes everything else work well with each other, and you accept the flaws because the larger picture it illustrates is great. Like when you talk about Ever 17, do you really ever talk about Sarah? It's like, no. Outside of asking where the hell she was at the start and have that be like a clue on what's actually going on, you never talk about Sarah. Fuck her.